Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing some spring book recommendations. You might be surprised to hear this, but I've actually never done a spring book recommendations video. I've done them for almost every other season. Like, I've done a summer book recs, fall book recs, and winter book recs video before, and I wasn't really planning on doing a spring recommendation video, but I did get requested a few times. You know, a couple weeks ago I posted in my Instagram, like, what are some videos you would like to see from me? And I actually had a few people request that I make a spring book recommendations kind of video. And so I'm so excited at the idea of this video because I had to put a lot of thought into, like, you know, which books would I recommend for the spring. And I do think there are specific, you know, horror and kind of thriller books that I would recommend for the springtime specifically. And there's also like a lot of different young adult contemporary. Like, I don't know about you, there's something about the springtime and the summertime. Like, those are like the only two times of year that I get really in the mood to like read some young adult contemporary or even like certain nonfiction at this time of year. I was looking through a lot of people's, you know, spring book recommendations videos on YouTube, and a lot of people had like a lot of fantasy and a lot of different things like that. And so I thought I should make a video for the non-fantasy readers like myself who are looking for book recommendations for genres that they enjoy at this time of year. So these are going to be my spring book recommendations. Before we do jump into the video though, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. You might be familiar with Skillshare because of their creative classes like photography and film and video editing and illustration, but what you might not know is that Skillshare has hundreds of career-focused classes as well. I think now more than ever we're starting to realize that traditional jobs are not a one-size-fits-all. And I think it's really important to learn how to design a career that fits you best. No goal is ever too small, and that's why I think Skillshare makes it so easy to just start to explore different kinds of things without feeling too much pressure to take on everything at once. And Skillshare is great whether you're just trying to learn how to manage your time better, learning how to build a brand for yourself, learning how to diversify your income. They have all different types of classes that you can take. I recently just started taking this class called Marketing Using YouTube to Humanize Your Brand, and this is taught by Aaron Winters, who is a fellow YouTuber, and I love taking this class because I love learning from other content creators who know what they're talking about and learning about the different ways that you can use YouTube to humanize your brand. I think it's so interesting and it's so insightful. There are so many classes now that I've taken from fellow content creators, and I just feel like I learn so much from them. But you know, if that class does not sound interesting to you, they do have so many other creative and fun classes as well, like photography, illustration, and graphic design. Like, there really is something there for everyone to explore. So the first 1,000 people to click the link down in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And thank you so much once again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get into the book recs, shall we? Alright, so the first book that I have on the spring book recommendations list is the only horror book that I have on this list, because it's gonna be Bunny by Mona Awad. Because yes, I've got jokes, and Bunny is just perfect for the, you know, the Easter time, right? Like the spring time. I'm pretty sure the first time that I ever read this book and the only time that I've read this book was around Easter weekend, and it just felt so fitting because of the whole bunny thing with this book. And if you didn't know this story, we follow this woman named Samantha, and she's currently like on a college campus going to school, and she gets involved with this group of girls where like all the girls call each other Bunny. It's very like cult-like and very weird, and this is a horror novel, you know? I mean, shit gets really strange in this book. It's kind of hard to even explain anything about this book without getting into spoilers, so I won't do that. But just trust me that this book, I feel like this book would either be good to read it in the spring or in the fall time, but because I personally read it in the springtime, I think it would be like the perfect horror novel to read in the spring, you know, especially around Easter time. I think it would just be really iconic. So Bunny, have you read it? Have you heard of it? I'm sure you've heard of it. And then some thrillers that I think would be perfect to read in the springtime. One of them would include Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty, and this one is one that I think would be perfect to read in the springtime, especially just because this book is so, I don't even know how to explain to you why this book would be perfect to read in the spring. It's just, this is such a kind of like a fun thriller in my opinion, where we're following this group of moms who, you know, like there was a murder on like a school fundraiser night, and then you're trying to figure out what exactly happened. And it's interesting because you're following this book where in between the chapters of like each one of the moms, you get like flash forwards of like the night of the fundraiser, and the police are like interviewing everyone in the town trying to figure out more information about these moms. But I also think that this book is a lot deeper than you would expect in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of really great, you know, like feminist themes in this book that I thought were really powerful. But then there was also like characters like Madeline in this book who, you know, she's the one that's played by Reese Witherspoon in the show adaptation, and her character, Madeline's character, honestly just like cracks me up. Oh my god, she is so freaking funny. Like, this is definitely one of the most funny thrillers that I've ever read. Like, I have so many highlights in here that's like orange highlighter, and that's kind of what I use anytime like a scene just kind of cracks me up. And Madeline, she just gives me major like Regina George, but like if she was a grown ass mom with like, you know, children and like other moms. She just reminds me so much of her, and I just think this book is so entertaining, and I think it's like perfect for the springtime. Like, I don't know why, I just think it's perfect for the springtime. Maybe it's because I read this in like April or May, and I just think it's such a good spring thriller. I would also recommend Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins for the spring, not only because this cover is giving major spring, right, with like the pink and the yellow, but also because I do think this would be like the perfect book to read either in the spring or the summer for sure. But this one is a really entertaining book where we're following this couple where they live in Hawaii, okay, so like the vibes are immaculate already. And then we're following this couple who like they agree to take these other girls that are vacationing in Hawaii, they agree to take them out to this like island that's like out in the middle of nowhere, and the island is known to be like super kind of like sketchy and weird. And so there's a lot of scenes in this book where they're like on a boat and they're going to the island, and then there's a lot of island scenes while they're there, which I know makes it sound like it's more of like a summer read, but I do think this is like the perfect kind of like entertaining quick thriller that would be perfect for the springtime as well. I don't know, maybe it is because of the cover, but I do think this would be a fun one to read in the springtime. Another book that I think would be absolutely perfect to read in the spring is this book called Modern Love, and this one is actually, it's a nonfiction, okay, but it's also a romance. So this was originally like a New York Times column that was like printed in the newspaper where people would like submit their own like true love stories that have happened to them in their lives, and then they ended up making this book out of like the most, like the best and the most iconic, you know, love stories that were submitted by people. And so this is a collection of a bunch of different short stories, but it's so cool because these are actually all true love stories, and it's just so interesting to hear about like the different things that people have gone through in their lives when it comes to like their romantic connections. And I don't know, there are some, you know, short stories in this collection that are just absolutely fascinating. Like, for example, one of the short stories is called My Husband Is Now My Wife. There's First I Met My Children, Then My Girlfriend, They're Related. And my absolute favorite in this entire collection is The Race Grows Sweeter Near Its Final Lap. Oh my god, like that one had me actually sobbing, like crying my eyes out. But I just think this would be like the perfect kind of like nonfiction collection of short stories to read in the springtime, because it's so hopeful and it's just so beautiful. And I don't even read nonfiction like super often, but this was just so uplifting and so inspiring to me. Another nonfiction book that I think would be perfect to read in the springtime is Wild, which is one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. And I do think that Wild would be the perfect recommendation for the springtime specifically, because I do think, you know, spring is so well known for like the winter is over, like all the frost is melting, all the cold is going away, and we're getting some like warmer days, you know, like we're reconnecting with nature again, we're getting back out there. And I think Wild is the perfect book for that kind of vibe, you know, like the feeling where you really want to reconnect with nature. I think Wild is that book for me. For me, I read this book in January, like I read this book in the winter time, and I remember having the feeling like if I had read this in the spring, it would have been even better, because when you read this book, it's gonna make you want to go out into nature, you know, it's gonna make you want to go like out on a hike somewhere, like get back out there. And for me personally, when I read this in January, it kind of was rough because I was like, it's too freaking cold to go outside, you know. So like reading this in the spring, oh my gosh, it'll probably just make you feel so alive, and it'll make you want to get back out in nature. And this is a nonfiction book. It's a true story about this woman who, you know, her mom has recently passed away, and she's kind of going through a really hard time in her life, but then she decides that she wants to hike the Pacific Crest Trail all by herself, which is basically this trail that's all the way from California through Oregon and all the way up to Washington state. So it's like almost the entire coast, like the West Coast. And it is just one of the most inspiring books that I've ever read. Like, it honestly really like changed my life in a lot of ways. I did make a video recently about like all the books that have changed my life, because I'm very dramatic. I'm very dramatic in that way. But I'll have that video linked down below if you want to see some other books that have changed my life. But Wild is definitely on there, and I think it would just be the perfect perfect book to read in the spring. I also did want to mention this is the last nonfiction that I have on this list, but there's this book called Feelings, and this one is so interesting, and I think it's so perfect to read in the springtime because this one, it's a graphic novel, but it's a nonfiction, and it's basically about your feelings and how they change through the seasons. And this was so interesting to learn about, because a lot of people do experience, seasonal depression, like when it gets a little bit colder outside and when the sun starts going down like really early, it really affects your mental health. And it was so interesting to read this novel that's like a nonfiction about mental health and about like seasonal depression. But I think this would be perfect to read in the spring because the story, like the structure of the story, it ends with like the springtime, and there are just so many beautiful quotes talking about how like spring is like a renewal, like spring is like, it brings your soul alive again, because after that gloomy dark winter is over, like we finally see the sun again, and it's just like a renewal for our souls. I know I'm being really dramatic when I say that, but I swear this book, Feelings, it is so cute. I highly recommend checking if like your local library maybe has this one available, because I know, at least for my situation, like my local library has so many graphic novels available, which like is amazing because graphic novels can be kind of expensive, but when the library has it, it's super convenient. So I would definitely check your library and see if they have this one, because this one is great for the springtime. All right, and then moving on to the young adult contemporary, because as I just said, I don't know what it is about the time of year, like spring and summertime is my ideal time of year where I just really crave young adult contemporaries for some reason. I don't know what it is, but one that I would definitely highly recommend is Fangirl by Rowell. Is anybody surprised? No. And you might be wondering why I would recommend this for spring instead of the fall, because this story, we're following a young girl named Kath who is starting her, freshman year of college. She's living on the campus. I don't know what it is about this book, but every time that I've read this book, because I've read this book, I want to say 4 times now, maybe more than that, and I'm actually currently rereading this book right now. And every time that I've reread this book, or even the first time that I read this book, it's always been in the spring. Like, I don't know why that is. Like, maybe I should try reading this in the fall sometime, but every time that I've read this book, it's been in the spring, okay? I don't know why I get the urge to want to reread Fangirl every single time around this time of year. And there's just something about this book, dude. I connect with this so hard. Okay, I could go on and on and on for all the reasons that I love Fangirl. Like, I'm not gonna do that, but I do think this would be the perfect book to read in the spring because it is just so, like, I love the kind of like reading about the daily life of a student kind of in the spring. I also think for me that this book has like the perfect amount of like really light, subtle romance throughout this book. And I don't know, it's so inspiring for me to read about this young girl who like wants to be a writer and who's like going to school for writing, and just hearing about like her day-to-day life and her developing friendships and like maybe having this like subtle romance happening at the same time. Like, I'm just, I love Fangirl so much. And she has a really great, relationship with her sister. Like, their relationship is really well explored throughout this book, and it's just everything. And I think if you haven't read Fangirl yet, I think it would be perfect to pick up in the springtime. If you didn't know as well, I thought I would mention it here that they are currently making Fangirl manga as well. Like, they're adapting it into a manga series, and this manga series has also kind of been everything. I've read both of these volumes so far. There's only 2 published so far, but these are not like the full story yet. I think there are still some that are coming out, but these are just absolutely everything. And it's giving me all the feels. It's giving me all the same feels that the actual novel did. So if you're someone who prefers, manga or graphic novels over, physical books, then you've got it covered here. You can do either or. I would also highly recommend Felix Ever After, not only because, dude, this book cover gives major spring. Like, look at all these flowers. It's all like bright orange and yellow and just like makes you feel good just looking at this cover. But also because I just think this is, again, it's one of my favorite like young adult contemporary kind of stories where we're just following this young boy named Felix. This book is definitely more emotional than like the average young adult contemporary that I read, and it has such an emotional impact, because Felix is a young trans boy and his mom is not the most accepting of him. And so it's really difficult to read this book at times because of that. But I also think this is just one of my favorite like kind of coming of age, and like figuring out who you are and figuring out what you want in life, and just following Felix's character was just so special. And I just think this would be a perfect book to read in the spring because it does have those like emotional moments where it's gonna pull on your heartstrings, but at the end of the day, it's also just like a really beautiful coming of age story. And that's really what I'm looking for when it comes to reading books in the spring. Like, I love reading like coming of age stuff at this time of year. And speaking of that, I would definitely also also recommend Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. If you have not read this graphic novel series yet, then like what are you even doing? Because I think Heartstopper would be the perfect thing to read in the spring, because again, if you're looking for something that is like uplifting and it's gonna make you smile and it's gonna make you happy, then like Heartstopper is really gonna be that book for you. You know what I'm saying? This is a young adult, it's a graphic novel, and it's a contemporary story where we follow these two young boys named Nick and Charlie. And this story is about, you know, these two boys falling in love and just starting to realize that they might have feelings for each other. And it's very great. You know, it's like coming of age, it's romantic, and it's so freaking cute. And if you haven't read the graphic novel series yet, there's also a really great Netflix, you know, TV show adaptation that has just gotten so freaking popular because it's so freaking cute. And I think Heartstopper would be really great, you know, to read at any time of the year, but I just think especially in the spring, it just has that like magic to it that's gonna make you feel so happy. Another one of my favorite young adult contemporary books that I've read in the last few years is She Drives Me Crazy, and this is another one that I just think would be perfect to read in the spring, you know, for all of the reasons that I've listed. But this one is so cute and it has some of my favorite tropes. Like this one is a female-female romance between these two high school girls, and this one has some of my absolute favorite tropes, like fake dating is involved in this one. There's also this kind of like hate to love kind of banter between these two girls that is just so much fun. I just really adore the characters in this book, and I would highly recommend the audiobook because I thought the audiobook was so much fun for these two. And again, you know, I don't know what it is with like this time of year and me just wanting to read like some cute high school young adult contemporary kind of romance stuff, but another book that I would recommend that also has similar vibes is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. And this one is another like young adult contemporary romance where we follow this young girl who decides to run for prom queen because she's trying to win this scholarship that comes along with winning prom queen, even though she doesn't really care. She doesn't really care that much about winning prom queen, but then it's also this romance because one of the girls that she's competing against for prom queen, she starts to catch feelings for, and so it's this very like forbidden kind of romance happening in this one. Also in this book, I just think this is such a good book, especially for young adult readers to read, because there's so much great representation in this book, but also because she just has the sweetest relationship with her younger brother in this book, and there is a character named Gabby in this book. Like, let's freaking go! I don't see it very often, but it's cool when it happens. And then the last book that I want to recommend for the springtime is a romance book, and that is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. And this is one that I think would be perfect to read in the spring, again, because this is one of those romance books that is so emotional, but just so beautiful at the same time. And at the end of the day, it's going to leave you with feelings of like feeling so happy and satisfied and just like enjoying your life. And I think the thing that makes this book so emotional and so hard to read is because our main protagonist, Alexis, she's been in this really, you know, abusive and kind of toxic relationship for a really long time at the beginning of this book. And it's about how she's, you know, a city girl, she's a nurse, and she's getting involved with this young country guy who's 10 years younger than her. Okay, I think she's like mid-30s, I want to say, and he's like mid-20s. But it's so beautiful to like see their romance slowly start to happen. This definitely is a romance that feels more forbidden just because of like the age gap and because they're just so different, right? Like they just have such different lifestyles. And so it seems like things are just really like stacked against them, and like it's going to be really hard for them to be together. Not just because of like their lifestyles, but because of like their age gap and like their families. Yeah, with this book, it just ended up being such a lovely surprise, and I was just so impressed by how wholesome and how like heartwarming this story ended up being, and also just like very emotional. I was not expecting to get as emotional with this book as I did, and I just felt so invested in, you know, the characters and this relationship, and I just think this would be a really beautiful story to pick up in the spring or at any time of year. But I was really impressed with this book when I read it last year, and I just think it's so uplifting and just might be what you're looking for this time of year. So I highly recommend Part of Your World. All right, so those are all of the spring book recommendations that I have for you today. You'll have to let me know what do you think of these recommendations? Like, do you agree that these are all books that you think would be perfect to read in the springtime? Or if you have any other books that you would recommend to me as like good spring book recommendations, I would love to know. I just thought it would be really cool to like contribute, you know, to the internet, my own spring book recommendations, because I see so many different spring book recommendations videos that are mostly just full of like fantasy kind of books or like, you know, classics or like different kind of stuff that I was like, I don't know if that would appeal to me specifically. So I thought maybe if there are readers like myself who are out there who don't really read a lot of classics or fantasy, that maybe you would want some book recommendations for the spring that don't really fit into those genres. And so hopefully you found something here that sounds interesting to you. You'll have to let me know if you're thinking about picking up any of these books that I mentioned, because I would love to know that. And thank you so much for watching as as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!